We've been in a series of messages here at the church that we've been calling Beyond the Walls. And the idea is that as followers of Christ, we have both a responsibility and a privilege of taking the good news of Jesus Christ into the different spheres of influence and the places that God has placed us in our communities, our neighborhoods, and in our jobs, our families. And so if you follow Christ, you want to do that. I'm guessing, right? That's probably something inside. You're like, man, I want other people to experience the forgiveness and the freedom that you've experienced. But in our culture, that's a tricky thing to do. It can cause you, maybe if you're overly pushy, to be marginalized. It could cause you to be misunderstood. And so we've been talking about how do we do this? How do we do this? And so today, I've invited both Brian, who's worked extensively in the business world, and my uncle Jeff to be a part of this conversation. Now, let me kind of just let you know who my uncle Jeff is. I call him Uncle Jeff. The rest of the world calls him Jeff Turner, okay, is his actual name. Jeff Turner grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and while he was going to Wichita State, began working part-time at Boeing, which is an airplane manufacturer. They worked for Boeing, and through the course of that time, after he graduated, began to kind of climb up through the company to the place that he ended up in executive management, and the school sent him to MIT to get his master's in business, and completed that time. I remember hearing you talk about that one time. You said it was weird to read the Wall Street Journal and read quotes from your professors that you would then go interface with. And so worked at Boeing until 2005 as a vice president, and then from there spun off a company called Spirit AeroSystems, which make airplane parts and work in the aerospace sphere. And while he was there, he started that company, took the company public, and Spirit is either kind of the number one, number two employer in the state of Kansas, besides the government. Would be number one with teachers and government employees, but then Spirit would be the number one outside of that employer in the state. And God's just given him tremendous influence, and yet, as I know my Uncle Jeff, and he's a very self-deprecating person, a very humble person, but to see a man who loves God, has a healthy family, healthy spirituality, and somebody that he has allowed God to use him in the marketplace, I wanted to invite him to just be a part of this conversation. And so Uncle Jeff, he flew in yesterday from Wichita to be a part of this, and I just want to say thank you for being here and coming. And can I call you Uncle? Can I just keep calling you Uncle Jeff? I mean,
sure.
Would that be weird for you? It would be weird for me to call him Jeff Turner. I feel like Grandma would spank me for doing that. Yeah. Okay, so
sure, nephew Greg, whatever you like.
So let me just kind of open our conversation with a verse. Philippians 2:3 is one you've maybe heard before, maybe not. It says this. It says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit." Okay, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. You could search the Bible, scour it from beginning to end. You won't find a verse that discourages you from being ambitious. So ambition is a good thing. It's a God thing. Philippians 2:3 speaks against selfish ambition. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about that, Uncle Jeff, how does a person not cross the line in their career, in their business? And we have some business owners and managers and people with careers. How do you not cross the line from ambition, pure ambition, to selfish ambition?
Well, I think it's interesting when you sent me these questions so I wouldn't look like a total buffoon up here. I read the question that I began to contemplate is, how do you know when you've become, when you have crossed that line? And it reminded me of your grandpa, my dad, and who was a wonderful man, and he was always kidding, always telling a story, a tall tale or something. And we used to say, do you know how to tell when Dad's lying? It's when his lips are moving, And of course he'd love that and he'd laugh about it. And I got to thinking about that. How do you know when you're selfishly ambitious instead of ambitious? And it's kind of like when you're breathing. You know, it's inane in us. It's part of us. And then I thought more about it. I thought, well, that's not terribly helpful to say that we always deal with this. But then I read the rest of the verse, and that you had up there on the screen, and you know, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. And the next verse says, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to be a servant and a servant leader. And when it's about you, you're on the wrong side of the line. And when it's about others, the people you work with, when you care more about their interest than you care about your own, then you're probably on the side of the line. You're on the side of the line that God calls us to be on.
Can I call you Uncle Jeff?
Sure.
Does that make us cousins?
Yeah.
I think I got that right. Is that something, putting others' interests first, is that something that came natural to you? Or did you find yourself as you were advancing or seeking to advance that you struggled with? I mean, did you wrestle with seeing other people succeed? Or is that something that just came natural? Or is that, in myself, I find that sometimes a struggle.
You mean I like naturally saintly?
I guess that's what I was skirting around that question.
No, I'm a like all of us. I think in my innate self, I'm a sinful, selfish guy. You know, and I just really care about me. So it's the cleansing power of the Holy Spirit in our lives that takes us from being unholy and moves us. We won't be holy till we're with Christ in glory, and in heaven beyond. But we move toward that, and there are. You know, Paul said he struggled every day. The good he wanted to do, he didn't do, and the bad he didn't want to do, he did, and that's what we do. We struggle every day, and it's a process. It's a constant process of submitting our selfish, sinful nature to Christ's power and Christ's nature in us. So no, it's not natural. It's not natural at all, but it becomes more a part of your lifestyle when you fill yourself with Scripture and with truth, and plus Greg's grandma, my mom, just beat it into me.
I have a question for you. So when you are in the marketplace, in the business world, there are times where you find yourself in you kind of have the dilemma where you may have to be asked to compromise your values to kind of go along, to get along. What do you recommend? How have you, I know you've been in executive leadership. There have been times that you've been in middle management. What do you do in those circumstances?
You know, when you first posed that question to me, it's been a number of years since I wasn't the boss. And I thought about that, and I thought, I don't run into that. I don't run into it where I got other people were pressuring me not to get along. So I have a young man that I've been spending some time with, and he thinks I'm mentoring him. I actually think he's mentoring me because I'm learning so much from the relationship. And so I showed him this question, and he goes, "Oh, that's a great question." He said, "That's a fabulous question." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And this guy, what he does is he goes around to service stations and fixes stuff that's wrong. One of the things they're supposed to do is they calibrate the meters on the pumps. You see them when you go in. There's a little sticker. It says, well, Matt's one of the guys who calibrates it and then puts initials and date. And he said, you wouldn't believe how often when they go out in pairs to do this. He said, you would be amazed how often the guys will say, it's okay, let's just sign it and go on. Because it's a 30-minute process to calibrate this thing. And Matt says, that's the pressure to go along, to get along. And I can remember back when I first started, when I was working, I can remember the catty remarks of coworkers that would say, they'd call you names like curve buster, or, you're working too hard, you're making us look bad, but it was just innate. I believe that we work as unto Christ, that ultimately Christ is our boss, not whoever our boss is. And you don't shirk. You do the job. You earn your pay. And I was surprised to find when I went into the workplace that people around me sometimes didn't feel that way. But I think it's what you believe is right, what your values are, and then you take the criticism. If the criticism is because you're working too hard, because you're really earning your money, because you're not shirking on I can deal with criticism like that. To me, that's way more an example of what Christ wants us to be like than going along to get along. But you got to give up sometimes the accolade of your coworkers, but frankly, that ain't worth much if what you've done is compromise a value in order to get along. I never wanted to get along that bad, I guess.
I've been in situations where sometimes it's kind of like gray areas, where maybe a proposal, I presented a proposal and found out where I was significantly off, maybe to the client's favor, but it's behind the scenes. No one would really know that if I made that correct or not. Were there gray areas that you struggled in business that were just maybe wasn't quite as black and white? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges in our work is we would really like, especially me, I'll just talk about me as a Christian, I would really like the world to be black and white, good and evil, and on the edges, and maybe not so far to the edges, but there are absolutes. Absolutely, there are absolutes. But there's this huge gray area, and we were talking about this the other night, and I find what's kind of an absolute for me wouldn't necessarily be an absolute for somebody else, and I know that might be a little bit hard, but Paul talked about that in his letters about, do you eat meat that's been given to idols? Because some people said you can't possibly eat meat that's been given to idols. It's a sin. It's like taking the devil's food and putting it in your body. And other people said, it's okay, it's just meat. Besides that, it's cheap. You can get it really cheap because the idol didn't eat it. So it's available on the day-old shelf, in Ephesus or wherever it was. And people would really struggle with that in the church. And I think what I try to do when I'm seeing something that's probably gray, there probably is some gray associated with it. I'll give you an example. When I was the general manager of the Wichita division before we spun it off and became an independent company, there were policies that the Boeing company had. And they were policies that didn't fit my particular belief system. And yet they were the policy of the company. And it was my job to administer the policies of the company. And so to me, that was a gray area. But I thought, you know what? I'm not the boss of the whole place. When I'm the boss of the whole place, I have more influence on what the policies say. But if the policy says we're going to do, and it had to do with stated inclusion of in those days of homosexuals and sexual orientation, and I know it's still an area of disagreement in the church. Should you exclude people? Should you include them? Should you? And it was actually God used that to work on my heart about, I was wanting to discriminate against the sinner instead of being tolerant of the sinner. God really worked on me. He said, Jeff, you're picking out a sin and you're wanting to highlight that sin. You know, what about these sins in you? You know, you're a sinner.
Wow.
We're all sinners. And so why would we as the church, why would we say, because you're a sinner, we don't want you around? And I had to deal with that. And it wasn't an easy thing to deal with. But it was the fact that it was a gray that God could use to impact my life individually.
It was interesting. We were looking over some questions, and I asked some of you in the church, a few people, to send in questions. And one of the people in the church, somebody sent the question and said, how do you, when you're in the work environment, how do you work with someone who's a sinner? And you said, well, they need to ask them what it's like to work with me, because I'm a sinner.
I think my wife wrote, "What happens when you live with one?"
When you're married to one? Okay.
It's tough.
I want to respond to this gray area thing, because you would think that as a pastor, all of your life is in the black and white, and it's really not. And I had a mentor of mine a number of years ago say something that just really stuck in my mind, and I think about it all the time. And he said, Greg, there will be times in your leadership where you're in a gray area, and you've got to choose a decision close to one line or the other. And he said, never make a decision that you don't feel like you could give an honest public explanation of. Yeah. And he said, if you imagine yourself in a gray area, and you imagine yourself standing in front of your church or standing in front of the people that you report to and giving an honest, genuine public explanation of it, if you feel good about that public explanation, then you make that decision. And I think about that quite a bit when I'm there. Okay, how would I feel about standing and speaking to our church about this decision? So let me ask another question. Success is this kind of nebulous word, right? Most people don't necessarily define it. It's just we feel successful or not. And when I was traveling this week, I was listening to a book, and in the book it was talking about these highly successful people who had accomplished really kind of the 1%. They're kind of the 1%ers, you know, that accomplished incredible things. And all of them, there was only like a small percentage that actually felt successful. It was like 85% of them did not feel successful, and yet by the world standard, they would have been very successful. So this is really kind of a weird, nebulous feeling, and a thing that a lot of people don't necessarily define. Let me ask you that question. How have you defined success in your life?
I really identify with what you're talking about people not feeling successful. I was fortunate enough in my career, early in my life, to be exposed to a lot of senior executives in the division, and it was amazing to me how unhappy they were. And I started watching people as they would come to retirement, and you know, there was an inverse relationship between how high they went in the company and how satisfied they were at retirement. I mean, I remember a guy that was one of my mentors early. Bruce was his name, wonderful guy. I patterned my relationship with my son off of his relationship with his son. And Bruce was just an absolutely wonderful guy. And when he retired, he was just like the happiest guy in the world. He was thankful for his job. But he had never risen above lead man. You know, and in the same week, I went to a retirement of one of the senior directors in the area, and he was just unhappy. He had not become the CEO or whatever. You know, it was like he had set his goal on success, and he could never satisfied. So as a relatively young man, I was thinking about that, and God gave me 2 weeks of I'd had a operation, which today with medicine, you know, the way it is now, it'd be like a, you know, outpatient 30-minute deal. In those days, it took 2 weeks to recover. And so I'm laying on my back. I got 2 weeks to recover. I'm a high-energy guy, and I got nothing to do but think, you know, which is dangerous.
That's very dangerous.
You know, you don't want to let your pastor think, because he comes up with 1,000 things for the rest of us to do. But I'm just laying there in bed thinking, and I started thinking about when I'm 65, and I would really encourage you guys, unless you're like me and I'm 63, so it's a short-term thing now instead of a long-term, but in those days it was a long-term thing, and I wrote and I actually wrote down, when I'm 65, I want, ... You want to know what those 5 were?
Yeah, please.
5 things. First one was, when I'm 65, I want to know God and still have the faith that I start with, that I have today. And I would tell you, I'm not quite 65, but that goal's doing pretty well, I think. The second one is, I want to be married to Rhonda. I don't want to be like people I've seen and have, second and third families. I mean, assuming I'm still alive and she's still alive. I want to be married to Rhonda when I'm 65. That one's going pretty good. She's still with me, I think. We're going to make
2
it.
years. Hang on, please.
Hang on, baby.
2 years.
She's gone through a lot.
We got to get him
Yeah.
to his goal, okay?
Yeah.
Just two more years.
She became a
Focus.
marriage and family therapist because of me, and just all kinds of things. But number 3, as I said, I wanted to know my children intimately. I didn't want them to go, who is that guy? Who was he? Why, like you hear about a lot of people in the business world. The 4th thing is I wanted to look back and say I have no major regrets. I wish I had, gone to the Little League games. I wish I'd have done X, Y, Z. So far, I have regrets. We all say, God, we could have done that better or whatever, but I don't have any major regrets. And the 5th one, and it was, I want to get my last promotion within 5 years of when I retire. And unless I consider retiring my last promotion, I'm probably not going to make that one. And so I tried to make those my priorities and say, if I can hit those, then I will feel successful. And I was just reading yesterday as we were flying in, a guy who's writing about don't make priorities like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only one priority, and that's your relationship with Christ. You can have other things, and they're more like this, not like this. Because when you do that, and I've reevaluated mine, and I've gone, it's not that my faith is my first priority. My faith is my priority. And then these other things fit into that. As opposed to saying, I'm going to do my faith, and then I'm going to do my family, and then I'm going to do my job. Yeah. It's like I'm going to live my faith in all these other things. So I think God is challenging me to think about life more intertwined than a set of priorities.
Why don't you keep going with that thought? Yesterday you talked about the question your friend asked you about fulfillment, like having fulfillment in work.
Yeah.
And it kind of piggybacks on that.
Yeah. The question was kind of this whole idea is what do I have to do to be fulfilled at work? Do any of you have that issue? I can't really see you, but what do I have to do to be fulfilled at work? And so the answer to that we almost always say is, I need challenging work. I need a good work environment. So we start this list of things about being really being challenged and being fulfilled. Makes us excited about going to work. I actually think that's absolutely wrong. I think if you want to be fulfilled at work, you have to realize that God is a God of work. It's a theology of work I've been looking at, and it's every one of us fall into this trap. We think about our work. It's our work. What is our philosophy of how we do work, and what are the results? And so we always think it's my work. It's my way of doing my work, and it's my results. And if you'll put a slash through all of those my's, and you'll put God's work, God's way, God's results, I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you're at the morning desk at the gym. You will be excited to do God's work. You know, and 20 years ago, I figured God spoke to me through this book and said, because Mom wanted me to be a preacher. I mean, she did. And you know how persuasive Mom was.
Yes.
And Mom wanted me to be a preacher. So my whole life I went, I don't want to be a preacher. You know? And I'd go, you know, dear God, I want to serve you, but don't ask me to be a preacher. Because if you ask me to be a preacher, I'm going to say no. You know? And so I felt like I was rebelling against God. Somehow he had this high call that he was trying to call me to, but I didn't want to do it. And somewhere along the way, I took one of these management training things.
Like a strength finder?
Like a strength finder. You know where preacher was on the list for me? Last. It was
Nice.
last on the list. And so I'm going, God didn't gift me to be a preacher, to be a minister, to do a church. He gifted me different. And so I should appreciate that gifting. And then I learned it's not, Jeff, it's not your work. It's God's. And I discovered, do a study on work in the Bible. And you will find that God is an active, working God. He didn't create and rest for the rest of eternity. Scripture says he is at work in you. And it's the same, the work word is labor. It's like, and you know how we are, so he has to work hard on us. I mean, so he is at work in you. So the theology is that you don't have to be a full-time minister to be a minister doing God's work. So if you do it God's work, God's way, and you put the results in his hands, it is amazing. Big promotions had come through at work about 20 years ago. And I'd been a director in the company for about 5 years. And they reshuffled all the management. And I became the tooling manager. Tooling manager. I don't know if you know this, but director is higher than manager. And two guys that I knew really well, that I thought I was better than them at leading, they got the new director jobs. I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. And I went home, and I probably didn't tell anybody because I'd take all this stuff and I put it inside. I went to work. I hated my job. I just hated it. It was a lousy job. It was a demotion. They sent me off to the far corner of the plant. Tooling is like way off in the corner. And by the way, the plant had like 15,000 people in it, you know, and 14,995 thought it would be a fabulous job, you know. It's just me, because I didn't get the one I thought I should have. And God began to work on me, and one day, he didn't talk to me. I talked to myself, and he puts ideas in there sometimes. Something I'd read or something, and he said, am I really God? You know, do you believe this? Do you believe it's my work, my way, my results? And he changed me to this day. That's the favorite job I ever had.
Wow.
And when they promoted me out of it, I didn't want to go. They promoted me to one of those other jobs that I thought I wanted, but it was that one and it made. And I look back, and it was a transition job that gave me the knowledge I needed to do the jobs that I needed to do, and to eventually become the CEO of the company, because I understood now the pieces that went together. But I had such joy in that job. I learned so much, and I had a great team, and absolutely nothing changed about the job content, the job requirements. Nothing changed except my attitude toward it. And I challenge it. In your job, if you are dissatisfied with your job, if you're unhappy, if you're disgruntled, I know preachers don't bet, but I bet. I bet you. I bet you.
Just tithe on the winnings.
It's you.
That was a joke. That was a joke. That was a total joke.
No, it wasn't.
That was a joke. Give it all. No, I'm just kidding.
But I bet you it's
Absolutely.
you. It's what's inside of you. It's
Yeah.
your relationship with Christ
Yeah.
that is the difference in whether you're enjoying your job or not.
And thank you so much. I just want to thank both. I mean, we're not done yet, but just, is this good stuff? Is this good stuff? I mean, I want to, for you thinking to have your uncle in and just you sharing this stuff. I mean, we spend so much of our time, that's what we do, the majority of our lives is at work, and how important is when we're wrestling with those issues. So this speaks to, a very important part of our lives. I was kind of categorizing all the questions that came in, and the biggest chunk of questions had to do with sharing our faith at work. So over the years, I just love to hear your thoughts on that. Is that something you were able to do? Do you do that often? Do you not do that?
I was so bad at that. I'm a get it done kind of guy, and so when I go to church on Sunday and they say, they preach on you should, be my witnesses, and and in your workplace, and and by the way, you take an evangelism course and you do this and you go, and I'm going, okay, I'm working with Joe, and I know Joe needs this, so I'm going to give it to him, and I was so bad at that. I just was horrible. And I'd get condemnation. I go, oh, gosh, I know I'm supposed to be witnessing for you, but I can't. I quit trying. I just quit trying. And especially as I climbed up the ladder, I just went, especially if I'm your boss, I guarantee you when I became the boss, I could get a lot of converts. Don't think that. I love to play golf. All the staff played golf. We got when I retired, a new CEO comes in. He loves to bike. It's amazing how many of the staff like to bike now. It's just amazing. They all go biking on the weekends, So I could have got a lot, but it's not. I don't think I think we're called to live Christ. We're talking about Christ Himself. That He was this obscure guy until He was baptized. And He got anointed, and then his public ministry just took off. But he had the Spirit of God in Him. Of course, He was God, and people were just drawn to Him. You don't see Christ. I don't. Maybe you do, but I don't see Christ going around going, "Hey, you need me," And when somebody turns around and walks away, He goes, wait a minute! Don't you know I'm the Son of God? You need me in your life. He knew that, right? But He said, "Come unto me." And those who came, He ministered to. And those who didn't, He didn't chase them. And so I think for us, living out our life, first of all, you got to have it, right? You have to have an intimate relationship with Christ. And when you have that and He fills us, Greg, you said something about people in need. When you have your eyes open, when God opens your eyes, people all around, people need Jesus. They don't want Jesus forced down their throat. Yeah. In fact, that's the best way to make sure they don't want Jesus. But it isn't Jesus they know they want oftentimes. It's just they're in pain. They're in need. I don't ever remember saying, I'm a Christian. Jesus is my Savior. You need Jesus to be your Savior. I don't think I've never been successful doing that. But I put my hand on people's shoulders and cried with them at work and said, I know you're hurting. I'll pray for you. And word comes back around. Guys that I've never seen will walk up to me and they say, I know you're a Christian. I've never stood up in front of the whole plant and said, by the way, now that I'm your boss, I'm a Christian. I want you all to know that. Things are going to be different around here. New sheriff in town. We're going to live by the holy book. I never, ever did that. I never, ever did that. And I just think if you love people, if you really care, the verse, if you care about them more than they care about you, you can't make it up. You can't fake it. How many times have somebody said to you, God bless you, I'll pray for you, and you go, yeah, right. 95% of communication is nonverbal. That may be wrong. It might be 92. might be 87. It's kind of a gray area, but it's not our words. It is not our words. People are empathetic to one another, and they can tell. When they tell you, what's that old saying? They don't care what you know. They just want to know if you care.
Just
No,
You said you weren't a preacher. You said you weren't a preacher.
You're getting fired up. Is that so? I think what you said there, that condemnation. I think a lot of people feel that. So,
Yeah.
how could you just clarify like, how you came to peace with that?
Well, how I come to peace with it, because it's it's a constant thing.
Yeah.
It's just a constant thing. But you got to think about who is the condemner, right? Who is the condemner? It's not Christ. It's the enemy of our souls. That's who condemns us. Christ doesn't. And so I think the way you come to grips with it is and I stumble and I do things and I say things I shouldn't say and I treat people like I shouldn't from time to time. And, I've apologized in front of the whole staff for things I've said inappropriately. And, I think if you care more about them than you care about yourself, it's not that hard to say, guys, I really screwed up. I shouldn't have said what I said. I shouldn't have done it the way I did it. Will you forgive me? Let's move on. It isn't that hard. I mean, and besides, if you're the boss, everybody knows the king doesn't have any clothes on. Everybody knows, And so a long time ago, I kind of got used to being a little bit of a foul up, because who do you know that hadn't had a cliffhanger in their nose? Anybody? Anybody? Do you know anybody that hasn't, in some time in their life, done something crazy?
Yep.
I'm having a group of young people in the company one day, and I'm talking to them, and I'm getting animated, and I'm holding a bottle of water, and I'm just talking away, and I'm all excited, and what I don't know is this water is sloshing out on my light tan pants, right where
The worst
possible spot.
Right, yeah.
And I
We
look,
got you. We got
look
you.
like my 3-year-old grandson who just had an accident. And I'm in the middle of this big meeting, and I'm the CEO,
Yeah.
and I look down, and I just start laughing because, thank God, it's just, we're real people, and I, by the way, I know some CEOs that always wear dark pants in case that happens. But they couldn't handle that because their image is all wrapped around their image, and yet everybody knows you have foibles. So
we need to go ahead and close it down. I want to kind of end with a thought. The year before we launched this church, I worked I was a low man on the totem pole in a gym, worked the front desk, minimum wage, and all my life, as I would, preach and talk in ministry, I would talk about the marketplace. I was always a little bit intimidated to do it because, I've got a Bible school degree, I'm a pastor, so I was kind of like, oh, you poor thing, I know it's hard out there, I know it's, and when I worked that job, which is how I met some of you that are here, I had this revelation, and it was how a person can be effective no matter how low they are in the organization by simply living their faith out in as selfless a way as possible. And I found myself in a place, even though my wages never changed and my title never changed, gaining influence both with my coworkers and the people that I served. And it's funny you mentioned people that would come to you and say, man, something different. I had a lady in the gym when she found out I was a pastor. She's like, I knew there was something different. I said, what are you talking about? She said, just the way you talked about your wife. Just the fact that you talk nice about your wife. And she said, I just never hear that. And it's interesting that I think if we just simply do the little things that God speaks to us to do. And then we look for opportunities, or if someone opens a door, we're prepared to share our faith if they open the door. Not that we're kicking it down, but if we see an open door, that we walk through it and let the Lord do that. And I think that if we do that, and you know what that's called? It's called walking by the Spirit. Living by the Spirit, letting Him lead and guide you, and not feeling like you have to, kick doors down. And, there are advantages and disadvantages to everything. If you're lower in a company than you want to be, you have an opportunity there within that without being the boss. There are some disadvantages of being the boss because people respond differently. What about the person underneath who is leading by example, who's serving the people around them that have nothing to quote unquote offer them professionally, that they can't leverage that relationship, but doing it as unto the Lord? And so, Uncle Jeff, thank you for coming and sharing your heart and life experiences with us.